G'day everyone, Rob Russ here. Welcome to The Unspoken Truth. If this is your first time here, welcome. It's great to have you here. And if you're back for more, welcome back and thank you for your ongoing support. Got a quick update for you on the meeting over in Lithuania at Vilnius and what's happening with NATO and Ukraine. So I'm going to round it up really quickly for you here in just a couple of minutes so you can catch up and see exactly where we're up to. So overnight, NATO have said that they're going to continue to support the Ukrainians, but there's been no formal invitation that's been extended to them as yet. So here we are waking up in the morning in Europe right now, and we're going to find out if something formal is going to happen in the next couple of hours. Whether or not that's going to be some sort of security guarantee or something else a little bit different, that remains to be seen. But I'll keep you updated on that as the events unfold. So what comes next? Well, Zelensky was pretty unhappy about what was going on. So everybody got together and they were meeting. If you can find this photo online, if you just Google NATO meeting 2023, you'll find this photo. It's a giant image. It's like 7,000 pixels wide. It's huge. But if you zoom into the picture, you'll see that everybody looks really super grumpy. It's quite funny. Joe Biden has absolutely no idea where he is or what's going on, and he's standing there puffing his chest out, and Rishi Sunak next to him is standing there with his eyes closed. And if you look closely at Emmanuel Macron, he's very, very cranky. Anyway, that's just a bit of an aside of what's going on, but they all seem pretty pissed off about something. I'm not sure what they're so upset about. Maybe it's a war with Russia that nobody wants and that they've all been drawn into. Let's take a little bit of a listen to what Jens Stoltenberg has to say about what's going on, and this was before they went in. So let's just take a little look at what Jens has got to say.
At the summit, we also make important decisions, sending a clear message to Ukraine that we stand by Ukraine for as long as it takes, and expect allies also to reiterate their commitment to provide military support to Ukraine to help them liberate more land. On the membership issue, I also expect that allies will send a clear and positive message on the path forward towards membership for Ukraine. I have proposed a package of 3 elements with more practical support with a multi-year program to ensure full interoperability between the Ukrainian forces and the NATO forces. This will move Ukraine closer to NATO. To strengthen the political ties with the establishment of the NATO-Ukraine Council. We will have the inaugural meeting tomorrow with President Zelensky. And then to remove the requirement for membership action plan. This will turn the membership process for Ukraine from a 2-step process into a 1-step process. So all of this will send a positive and strong message.
So what does it all mean, folks? Well, what he said right at the end there is probably the most important thing. So he mentioned the membership action plan. So part of the reason that it takes so long to join NATO is it's not just the interoperability of your military, meaning you're using the same weapon systems as everybody else, but it's the government and the politics and all of the associated things with your country has to meet the NATO standard is what they're doing. So if you look closely here at the paragraph below the picture of the flags there, it says so the second or the last sentence there, it says, the membership action plan covers political, economic, defense, resource, security, and legal aspects of your country. So it's not even talking about your military, it's talking about your country as a whole. So they have a standard that you need to meet in order to be invited there. And what NATO was saying and what Jens is saying there is that they've completely dispensed with that. So we don't need that. Zelensky is not very happy about what's going on. And, I could kind of see his position, right? So he's come out and blasted NATO, saying that it's actually absurd. So he was photographed here at a speech in a town square in Vilnius with the Lithuanian president and his wife there as well. Zelensky's wife's to the left of the picture. She just cut off the picture there. But he's on stage there and he delivered a nice speech to them, pretty much saying that we're fighting in Ukraine so you don't have to fight the Russians here. And the crowd is cheering, and they're all saying what a hero he is and what a good thing that actually is. But the reality is you could tell from his demeanor that he was pretty unhappy about what was going on. But as Jens Stoltenberg said at the opening press conference there, that they're going to sit down and meet today and they're going to be discussing exactly what's going on in terms of security guarantees. Now, part of the reason that they won't invite Ukraine into NATO right now is because, first of all, they're at war. But there's a couple of technicalities going on here, right? The Russians haven't declared war on Ukraine, and Ukraine haven't declared war on Russia either. But the problem is, if Ukraine get brought in under the umbrella of NATO and Russia are attacking them, then is that going to trigger Article 5? So that's the hesitation that NATO has. And NATO have said previously that we don't accept anybody or even their application to come to NATO if they're at war. But nobody has declared war. So we're talking about all these little nuances that they pull out when it suits them, when it works for them, they pull it all out and make it all happen. And it's no surprise that Zelensky's upset about it all. So we now know from what the Russians have told us a couple of months back when the Ukrainian delegation went to Turkey to negotiate with the Russians that they'd had an in-kind agreement. And remember, Putin came out, he was on stage and he had a piece of paper and he's pointing at the signature saying, look, they signed it. They agreed to it. And then Boris Johnson quickly flew across to Kyiv and he said, no, we're not agreeing to any of that. We'll supply you with all the weapons. And, you know, I think that NATO and the allies and everybody are just supplying Zelensky with just enough weapons to get it there. And everybody's really scared of this escalation. But the reality is the Russians are not going to be able to go up against 32 other countries all at once. They're just not. And NATO is designed to actually solve that problem really quickly. And the hesitation that NATO has is that that's going to escalate into potentially a nuclear conflict. Remember, for the last 50 years, every time we play the Russian side in an exercise and we go up against a NATO versus Russia exercise, we lose. And that's because the Russians resort to using nuclear weapons according to their doctrine. So when we play the Russians and use their doctrine and behave like their doctrine tells you to, we lose because they use nuclear weapons. And remember the difference between us and them as it comes to nuclear weapons. Both sides, West and Russian side, have nuclear weapons. And we say that a nuclear war, even Jens Stoltenberg in that press conference, I didn't put it in the video there, but he came out and said that a nuclear war should never be fought because it can never be won. So no one wins in a nuclear war. So that's the Western philosophy of nuclear weapons. But the Russians are actually training to win a nuclear war. The Russians believe that they can win a nuclear war. That's why they will escalate to the nuclear level. And that's the reason why NATO has refused to get involved in this as it stands at the moment. So I'm concerned that nothing is really happening. There's situation, no change on the ground as we see it. Other than the thing that's actually maybe changed a little bit is we've got a bit more clarity on how long this is going to go on. And according to what Jens Stoltenberg said at the start of his little monologue there in the press conference, he's saying that we're going to continue to support NATO for as long as necessary. And he expects the NATO members to actually do that. So what is this going to go on for another 4 or 5 years? By the time we sit down at a negotiation table, years are going to be passed and Ukraine's going to be completely and totally decimated. And the terms and conditions that the Russians are going to set, they're going to say, no Ukraine in NATO. And here we are with Ukraine trying to get into NATO, and we're going to be talking about security guarantees or something along those lines later today. Ladies and gentlemen, this has escalated, and it's going to continue to escalate, and it's going to be more prolonged than what anyone could possibly anticipate. I don't think the Ukrainians have got as many forces as they claim to. I don't think they're holding back in reserves. They're taking back a fair amount of ground in the last couple of days as you look at the maps and you're hearing the reports, but you've got no way to verify anything that's going on there, and you have to trust them. And so assume that they're actually correct in telling you how much ground they're taking back. What does that actually mean? Are they going to be able to hold that ground? Is Russia just going to come back and counterattack, and we're just going to go tit for tat back and forth on the front lines here, and this is going to continue? How long is this going to continue for? This is kind of ridiculous. There's no real guarantees that Zelensky's got, particularly in relation to the timing. And I understand why he would feel that way, and he feels that frustration, and why he just said it's absurd, because he suggests that Ukraine are fighting on behalf of NATO on the eastern flank of NATO. They're the ones that are fighting the Russians and stopping them. But the Russians are saying, hey, we don't want NATO on our doorstep. So there's two fights going on here. The Russians are fighting over one thing and the Ukrainians are fighting over something completely different. And there's a third fight there where NATO are trying to not get involved in any of it either. But they're trying to play both sides of it with some sort of strange, delicate balance. Anyway, folks, I just wanted to give you a quick update here. I'd love to know your thoughts about what's going on with NATO and whether or not the Ukrainians should be admitted. Do you think that they should be admitted into NATO? I look at it and I think, well, why do you get to skirt all of the rules and regulations when everybody else has to comply with those rules and regulations? Just because you're facing a different circumstance to everybody else, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be held to the same standard. And I understand why Zelensky would feel upset about that, but I also feel that those standards exist for a particular reason, and no one else has had special treatment before. So essentially, you could say that they're already a de facto part of NATO anyway, because if NATO and everybody else in the West stopped supplying the Ukrainians weapons, the Russians were just going to roll them up. So the Russians have actually won this war, and they've succeeded in doing what it is that they said that they were going to do, which was to demilitarize Ukraine. They said a bunch of other things, but that was one of the KPIs that they'd set out for themselves. And if the war of attrition has got to a point where Ukraine is only now using Western weapons and just a mix of what was left over with the Russian weapons or the Soviet weapons, then the Russians have succeeded. So is Ukraine already in NATO? Well, it already seems to be a de facto member to me. I'd love to know your thoughts. Pop them down in the comments below. All right, that wraps it up for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.